Headlines from Air Force Radio News, I'm Tech Sergeant Jared Watson. U.S. forces conducted a precision airstrike in Syria that killed senior al-Qaeda in Syria leader Abu Afghan al-Masri. Al-Masri, an Egyptian originally, joined al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and later moved to its Syrian affiliate. He had ties to terrorist groups operating throughout Southwest Asia, including groups responsible for attacking U.S. and coalition forces in Afghanistan and those plotting to attack the West.
Colonel John Dorrian, the Operation Inherent Resolve spokesman, addressed reporters in Baghdad, Iraq, to discuss our battle to liberate the city of Raqqa.
We've dropped more than 3,700 bombs, missiles, artillery, and rockets, and this has resulted in hundreds of fighters being killed. Their fighting positions have been removed. We've hit their vehicle-borne explosive devices, and we've destroyed the tunnels that Daesh has dug below the city.
Meanwhile, over in Syria, the SDF is consolidating the gains it has made in the first phase of its drive towards Raqqa, and the SDF continues its isolation of ISIL's so-called capital. The coalition continues to provide critical support to our partner forces in Syria and in Iraq, especially through the air as we maintain maximum pressure on ISIL. I also want to briefly address the results of the investigation into the September strikes in Dar ez-Zor, Syria, that you heard about earlier today from CENTCOM. As you know, CENTCOM released the results of their investigation earlier today. The investigation determined that although the strikes likely hit forces aligned with the government of Syria, the strikes were conducted under a good faith belief that the strikes were targeting ISIL in accordance with the law of armed conflict and the applicable rules of engagement. Secretary Carter has been briefed on the investigation. He is grateful for the hard work of the investigative team and the participation of our coalition partners. He also fully supports the efforts of U.S. Central Command AFCENT and the Combined Air Operations Center to implement lessons learned from this incident. The United States is not only the most powerful and most precise military on earth, we are also the most transparent. When we fall short of our high standards, as happened in this case, we acknowledge our mistakes, we learn from it, and that's what we will do after this event. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions. Idris.
Coming to the CENTCOM report that you mentioned, Secretary Carter has been briefed on it. Is he satisfied with the way the officials, the United States officials on the ground handled themselves? Because there were clearly a series of errors that led to this.
I think obviously the Secretary is concerned by the report that we have ended up striking a target that did not end up being the target we thought we were hitting, the coalition. And he wants to make sure that something like this doesn't happen again, and that's what he certainly expects of the operations, the air operations that will continue, that there'll be lessons learned from this, and this sort of thing can be prevented. And again, these are, as you heard today from the investigating officer who investigated this was a situation in which they had high confidence they were hitting ISIL, and it turns out that that was not the case, that they likely hit regime-aligned forces. But they had reason to believe that they were hitting ISIL. A number of factors contributed to this. We're going to learn from that, take lessons from it, and make sure that this sort of thing can't happen again, or certainly that the chances of it happening again are reduced.
Does he believe that anyone should be reprimanded, or there should be some sort of impact on the officials, because there were clearly some errors that could have been, avoided?
The Secretary is confident that there will be lessons learned here, that those will be applied. The correct processes and procedures will be applied going forward.
You don't expect anyone to be further reprimanded?
At this point, there was, as we understand it, based on the investigation, there was no malice here. There was no effort. This was what they believed to be an appropriate target. We've now learned since that that was not the case. And the Secretary will leave it to the commanders to determine anything along those lines.
Talk about the policy impact that this strike had and how it impacted your dealings with Russia, because obviously the investigation dealt with the technical aspects of it. But from a policy perspective, what impact did that have on working with the Russians since September?
I think the one thing that the investigation made clear, one thing that we've tried to do since, for example, is to make clear that in those conversations that happen on that hotline, that if there's immediate information that needs to be relayed, that it should be relayed right away. That's one of the most immediate after effects of this. But with regard to broader policy, I don't believe that there has been a change. Yes, Ryan.
So following up on the Russia contact, so in they were told by the investigating officer that this was the first time that Russia had been made aware of actual targets before coalition warplanes struck. We were understanding that this was the hotline was for deconfliction of airspace. This seems to be a little bit different. Could you talk, was there a lot of discussion about kind of providing that information? Is this a change in what the hotline's designed to do? Has that kind of information been shared regularly?
No, I think as you heard from General Col, this was in fact the first time that this kind of information was relayed, and it was relayed because of the number of aircraft that would be in the area, as I understand it. And again, I would defer to CENTCOM and the investigators for the detail on this. But because of the number of aircraft involved, this was an effort. The purpose of that line is for deconfliction, and that was what was attempted here. And they did provide an area of operation because of the risk that there might be Russian aircraft in the same area. So they went out of their way. They did something that was not necessary under the terms of the memorandum of understanding. So they tried to provide the kind of guidance that would avoid some sort of miscalculation or misunderstanding in the air. Unfortunately, there was the after effect of this was a strike that did not end up with the result that we had intended.
There was a little talk about, whether or not the question was asked if compensation had been discussed at all. I understand this is something that's left to diplomatic. It said it was going to be left to diplomatic channels. Is the Department of Defense involved in those conversations at all about the prospect of compensation? Is something that's being looked at?
I'll defer to what you heard today on the call from General Col on that. I'm not aware of anything that's actively happening. Yes, Carla.
Thanks, Peter. Going back to the Deir ez-Zor strike, you said that this was the first time that the U.S. had relayed the coordinates to the Russians because of the number of aircraft. How many times has that happened since the Deir ez-Zor strike?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't know if it came up in the call or if I'd refer you to CENTCOM for that. I'm not aware of it happening again since, but I can't say with certainty. But again, this was a unique instance in which the sheer number of aircraft involved. They thought they did it out of an abundance of caution. And again, they were not obligated to do that, but the idea here was to promote safety of flight, and that was the goal in making that call.
So is the United States still looking to enhance the MOU?
I think we continue to engage with the Russians with regard to safety of flight. Those discussions have been professional and productive in terms of maintaining that line of communication, and I think as we'll continue to have those conversations to see if there are ways to achieve greater safety, greater understanding between our air crews and their air crews so that we minimize the chances of something, a miscalculation in the air. So we would have urged the Russians to maintain that memorandum of understanding and the communications, and nothing's changed in our view on that. We think it's an important line of communication to maintain in order to preserve the safety of our flight crews and, of course, the Russian crews as well.
Will the United States consider cooperating with Russia to validate targets on the ground in the future?
We have no plans at this point to cooperate with Russia in that way. Yes, Gary.
Peter, now the formal report is out, are you planning to formally apologise to the Syrian government?
Gary, as you know, at the time of the incident, we did express a regret if coalition forces mistakenly struck forces aligned with the regime, and that appears to be at this point the case, that it's likely, although we can't say with certainty, that those were government-aligned forces, and we'll stand by that at this point, that if, again, if a mistake was made in this instant, it's a mistake we regret.
A regret isn't an apology, though.
I'm going to leave it at that, Gary. Yes?
Peter, how do you evaluate the advances that the Syrian regime is making in Aleppo, and what kind of implications do you see once Aleppo falls into the hand of Damascus?
Well, obviously, like others, we've been watching what's happening there. We certainly have concern for the humanitarian situation in Aleppo. You can't watch what's on the TV screen and not be moved by that. But as you know, Joe, our focus from a U.S. military standpoint remains, the Department of Defense remains on the ISIL fight. And we would continue to encourage a peaceful resolution of the Syrian civil war and an end to what we're seeing in Aleppo. and Secretary Kerry is taking the lead, continues to conduct negotiations. I'll leave that to my State Department colleagues to articulate our views on that. But what we're seeing in Aleppo is a tragedy, and what we're seeing with the Syrian civil war for months play out is a tragedy, one that we would, of course, encourage all the players to reach a peaceful resolution to what has been a situation, a humanitarian situation that we all deplore. In the meantime, we're going to remain focused on our efforts in Syria against ISIL.
Don't you think, or do you think, having the Syrian regime taking over Aleppo could help the coalition in the fight against ISIS? Do you see any relation between both operations?
Anything that further strengthens the hand of the Assad regime, we do not see as playing a helpful role in terms of not only ending the civil war in Syria, but bringing peace to Syria. It's one of the reasons ISIL formed in the first place. So we don't see necessarily, as just as the Secretary expressed concerns about anything that strengthened the support for Assad when the Russians first came in. I think we continue to maintain the same view.
So I could understand from you that having the Syrian regime taking Aleppo, this could complicate the war against ISIS.
Well, having the Syrian regime, again, the regime itself has been fueled the civil war. Its actions have made the situation in Syria worse. And we don't think that the military efforts by the regime do much to help the people of Syria. And what would help the people of Syria is a peaceful end to the civil war. And that's what we're encouraging. That's certainly what our colleagues at the State Department, led by Secretary Kerry, are doing with as much energy as possible.
Quick question, Peter. Have you seen any evidence that the YPG is working closely with the Syrian regime in Aleppo?
I can't speak to that. It's not something I'm tracking. I'm not aware of that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just a follow-up on Aleppo. Does the Secretary, as he is at the helm of the most powerful military in the world, feels as a moral responsibility that the United States military should stop this onslaught going on inside the city? Or how does he feel about this, the things going on in Aleppo as he's going to go out just in a month and a half?
I think you've heard, just to reiterate what I said before, and I think you've heard from the Secretary that the most important thing that can happen right now would be a peaceful end to the Syrian civil war, and that rests in the hands of the regime and rests in the hands of its allies who are helping fuel the civil war at this point. And the United States, again, not at the Department of Defense, but our colleagues elsewhere, they can speak to it better than I can, continue to make every effort to try and, with the help of other, the multinational community, other countries, continue to try and make the case for a peaceful resolution. So we do not believe that there's a military solution that can end the civil war, and so the policy decision has been to maintain our focus on ISIL, and that's going to continue to be our focus.
I understand it, but the issue is this: for several times, these diplomatic efforts somehow blocked, broken, whatever. Then, doesn't the Secretary believe that at least in order to put those diplomatic discussions back on track, that the military should at least have some points or positions to push the parties to do something?
I think the United States has made clear. Our view on the civil war and the need to end those hostilities. And again, that's been the effort of diplomats led by Secretary Kerry, and our focus has been on ISIL, and we're going to continue to remain focused there. That's been what this president has asked Secretary Carter to carry out, and we're doing that to the best of our abilities.
This morning, I think you may have seen our note of Washington-based ambassadors and senior diplomatic representatives from the 68-member Global Coalition to Counter ISIL gathered at the Department of State to review the status of our global campaign to defeat this terrorist organization and to discuss next steps. Coalition members noted the close coordination between our military, intelligence, law enforcement communities, which has resulted in a significant degradation to Daesh's global network. They also reviewed operations underway to liberate Mosul in Iraq and to isolate Raqqa in Syria, and were encouraged by the progress that has been made to date, while also maximizing the effort to protect civilian life. Coalition partners reviewed several key indicators that have been useful for measuring our progress in defeating Daesh's network, to include territory gained and lost, access to foreign terrorist fighters, access to revenue, access to borders, leadership attrition, media and propaganda output, and global cohesion. Thanks to the efforts from our global coalition, all of these indicators are now trending in a positive direction. And I would refer to the media note, again, that we released for further details on each of these. We are, as we've said many times, making significant progress against this terrorist group, but we also acknowledge that this is going to be a long-term fight. It's going to require constant international cooperation and pressure, and the application of maximum pressure, indeed, to sustain the momentum achieved to date.
With your multilateral partners on the Syrian civil war?
They still are ongoing. The multilateral effort, the teams are still discussing ways to get at a framework for a cessation of hostilities. Pardon me. I don't have a specific readout to give you, as we've sort of avoided doing that day by day, but the talks are ongoing, and again, we wouldn't be there, we wouldn't be participating in them if we didn't think there was a reason to do so.
As they continue, a good chunk of formerly rebel-held Eastern Aleppo has fallen to regime forces. Is that something that you've brought up with your Russian partners in these talks?
We haven't missed an opportunity to continue to raise our deep concerns, indeed outrage, at the continued bombing and siege of Aleppo, and we'll continue to do that in every forum and through every venue that we have available to us.
Is it your understanding that Russia is an active participant in the assault on Eastern Aleppo?
Well, again, I'm not going to get into an order of battle here, as I've said. What I will say, and we've said before, is that Russia has considerable influence over Assad. And when they have shown in the past that they're willing to use that influence for a positive outcome, it makes a difference. What we've continued to assert is that Russia bears the ultimate responsibility here for what the Syrian regime is doing and being permitted to do in terms of the devastating civilian casualties and destruction of civilian infrastructure, to include hospitals, in and around Aleppo, and we've made that clear time and time again. But in terms of whose aircraft is flying and all that, I don't have that kind of information, and wouldn't be appropriate for me to deliver it from this podium in any event. But clearly, tactical aircraft continue to bomb neighborhoods in Aleppo. Clearly, there's still shelling. Hospitals now are all but shut down. I saw a statistic this morning that for the roughly 120,000 children that we estimate, the UN, estimates, is in Aleppo, there's 2 pediatricians. Unfortunately, many of the casualties that are being suffered by children don't necessarily need pediatric care, but it just goes to the point that medical professionals are increasingly at a loss to take care of just basic health necessities there in Aleppo. And I saw a quote from a resident of Aleppo that their concerns are now beyond just food and water. It's the slaughter, and slaughter was the word that this individual used.
Could we stay on Syria? Now,
sure.
You're saying slaughter, right?
I didn't say that. I said, as resident of Aleppo, referred to the fact.
Do you believe statements that speak of slaughter in Aleppo?
We've talked about atrocities. We've talked about the utter disregard for civilian life. And yes, I think by any stretch, if you just look at what's been happening on there, innocent people are being slaughtered in Aleppo.
Is there any way to have some sort of figures on what's going on, the death ratio or the slaughter ratio?
Saeed, you can go online and look at these reputable aid organizations that are keeping track as best they can, and they'll tell you that literally, thousands of people in Aleppo are being affected, killed, wounded, and affected on any given day.
Okay. Now, considering the fact that in the portions of Aleppo, which are the larger portions of Aleppo, that are under government control with about 1.5 million people, where, you know, life goes on semi-normally and so on. Wouldn't it be better once the government or government forces regain control over eastern Aleppo, that they can provide those kind of services that have been denied them?
Government forces?
In the past? Yes. Syrian government forces.
Syrian government forces providing services to the people of Aleppo.
Are they not, are they not doing that in western Aleppo, which is the larger portion of Aleppo?
The only thing that I've seen the Syrian government prove willing to do in Aleppo is kill innocent people, destroy infrastructure, and try to reduce the city to rubble. I'm not aware, and look, I'm not on the ground, but I'm not aware that they're, you know, that they're bringing in baskets of food and water and restoring electricity and trying to bring life back to normal in Aleppo. I've seen absolutely zero evidence, and I don't think you have either.
Have you gathered, or have you been able to gather any kind of information on how things are going, or what is the situation in western Aleppo under government control? In terms of schools and hospitals and things like that?
I'm not capable of breaking it down by neighborhood here. Again, every bit of information we get, and we get it from a lot of different places, continues to tell a story of a city under siege, a dwindling population that is increasingly being killed by its own government, with the support of backers of that government, to include Russia. And again, you don't have to look any further than you know, going online or looking at television coverage to see what's going on there. And it's been going on steadily now, day after day after day.
I have a couple more. Now, there was all kinds of analysis and so on saying that Secretary Kerry is doing, you know, running against the clock to bring about some sort of an end to the siege. Could you share with us some of that, or could you tell us or enlighten us?
Well, what I can tell you is that the Secretary continues to try to find a political solution to the conflict in Syria, which has to begin with a cessation of hostilities and has to be accompanied by humanitarian aid. And he's doing that with the same sense of urgency that he has been doing that now since he's been in office. And yes, of course, Saeed, he's mindful of the calendar. And he's mindful of the fact that a new administration will be coming into office here at the end of January. But to suggest that he's running out the clock, or that there's some sort of frantic or frenetic, you know, last-ditch effort here in the remaining weeks that he has in office, it just simply doesn't comport with the facts. The Secretary has always had a sense of urgency about trying to solve the conflict in Syria through a political solution. And since Aleppo has come under siege now for the last several months, it has always been something on his mind. It has always been something that he has raised with Foreign Minister Lavrov and with other foreign ministers of involved nations and with the ISSG. I mean,
Secretary Kerry's focus on the humanitarian situation there, or is he also focusing on how to secure the Syrian opposition's hold on eastern Aleppo?
His focus is on getting a cessation of hostilities in place, specifically in Aleppo, so that humanitarian aid can get in. None of it has. And so that we can restore the kind of conditions that are conducive to a resumption of political talks between the opposition and the regime, and that's what his focus is on.
So is it only on humanitarian?
No, I just said his focus is on getting a cessation of hostilities, to get the violence to stop, and without question, the vast majority of violence is being perpetrated by the regime with its support from backers like Russia. We want to get that violence to stop. We want to get aid in so that we can get a resumption of political talks.
So has Secretary Kerry discussed?
Go ahead.
There was a report, unconfirmed report in the Washington Post. I would like to ask. So
I'll give you one more.
The Washington Post, yes, cited unnamed officials who said that an arrangement, some kind of an arrangement, is being discussed for the opposition to separate from al-Nusra and for the fighters to leave eastern Aleppo. Can you confirm those?
No, I'm not going to speak to the claims of anonymous officials. I will tell you that the Russian side has made very clear their concerns about separation of al-Nusra from other opposition groups. And frankly, we have talked a lot about the need to do that as well. That is a difficult thing. We've talked about that for many months, this marbleization, if you will, of the marbling of opposition groups with al-Nusra. We've been very clear with the opposition groups that we have been in communication with, and some of our partners are in communication with, about the importance of not being co-located with al-Nusra, not participating in al-Nusra operations because they are outside the cessation of hostilities. But I'm not going to get into a readout of the details of the kinds of things that are being discussed.
Including groups accused of human rights abuses under the control of the Iraqi government would, alienate the Shia, the Sunni population and sort of lead to the same.
No, of course we do. And like I said, we don't want anybody participating in this fight in a manner that would inflame sectarian tensions any more than they already are a problem. So yes, of course we have concerns about that.
If this law were to be finalized and passed, would when it goes into effect, if it goes into effect, does this then affect the kind of assistance that the U.S. can give the Iraqi military?
Well, I don't want to speculate here about an outcome we don't know is going to be the case. But we have very strict regulations, very strict laws that we have to obey when it comes to aid and assistance to foreign units. The Leahy Law, which I think you're familiar with. And we follow that law scrupulously. U.S. aid and assistance cannot and will not go to units that have been proven to have participated in human rights violations. We take that very, very seriously. So,
what is the status there after all this talk about a ceasefire and a peace deal? There are reports that the Saudi-led coalition have carried out airstrikes again, killing a number of civilians in Hodeidah. What do you have on that?
Well, I would tell you that obviously we continue to support efforts to get a cessation of hostilities and a peaceful resolution to the conflict. We certainly have seen reports in just the last several days of continued strikes and violence. We continue to call upon all sides to cooperate with the UN Special Envoy and to renew their commitment to a cessation of hostilities as quickly as possible.
Has the Secretary been in contact again with the principals he was?
I'm not aware of any follow-on conversations that he has had with the principals, but he continues to have discussions with regional partners about the situation in Yemen and about how to get a cessation of hostilities in place.
Last week, EU Parliament passed a resolution to counter Russian media, and specifically they called out Sputnik and RT. Are you concerned by this resolution?
I haven't seen that resolution, so I'd have to take that question.
Do you think it says they're engaging in information warfare, and they even discussed that EU and NATO should develop a strategic communications plan to counter Russian media, including Sputnik and RT. Do you think the United States needs to develop a strategy? First of all, do you think RT...
Well, look, I mean, I haven't seen this report, and I haven't seen this, so I'm a bit of a loss to comment specifically about it. But concerns about Russian activities in the information environment, their use of propaganda, those are not new concerns. And we share concerns with many other nations about the way Russia tries to use the information environment to its own ends, be they political, social, cultural, or economic. And that is something that we're going to continue to talk about with our allies and with our friends and partners throughout the world. But I don't have a specific reaction to this resolution because I just haven't seen it.
Do you share concerns about Sputnik and RT?
Look, I have made clear, time and time again here about our concerns about Russian efforts to manipulate the information environment in a way that serves their narrative and isn't necessarily hewed to the truth and to facts. I think it doesn't. You can look on my Twitter account. And you can see how many times Guyana and I have had disputes here about, my perfect willingness to express concerns about the non-editorial independent nature of Russia today. But I don't have a specific concern with respect to this resolution and what you're saying in terms of it calling out specific media outlets.
Specifically to...
And the other thing, let me just, if I could just add, you're here and you're here. We credential you. We allow you to come into the State Department, into this briefing room. Even though, as I've said, clear, I have some concerns about the editorial independence of some Russian outlets, but you're allowed in here, and you will continue to be allowed in here to pose whatever questions you want of me, including ones today that I can't answer because I just don't know about. But I think that's important. I mean, and if you don't mind, let me just hit this point again. I think it's that here at the United States State Department, we don't parcel people out like that. And we allow you to come in here and ask whatever you want. And we do the best we can to provide the information that we can. And there's not too many other places, certainly no other government that I know of, that allows media, no matter where their editorial processes land, to do that. And I'm pretty proud of it.
I've offered you guys to subscribe to the Newswire. But John, one other thing. They parallel us.
Let him finish.
They parallel us with Islamic State propaganda within this resolution. I mean, do you think, are you threatened by our propaganda as much as you are?
I'm not threatened by Sputnik. And frankly, we're not threatened by Islamic State propaganda. In fact, one of the things that we talked about...
Would you put them on the same parallel?
Would I put...
Would you put them on the same
Sputnik
plane?
on the same level with Islamic State? No.
Propaganda?
No, I would not.
Okay.
But, and as I said in my opening statement, they talked a lot about Islamic State propaganda efforts in today's meeting with the ambassadors from the members, the coalition members today, and the fact that we know empirically that they're, I know I'm getting off the topic here a little bit, but Islamic State's Daesh's efforts to exploit social media are waning and failing, and they're struggling, and it's hurting their narrative, it's hurting their morale. We know that for a fact.
The Russian government said today that they would start talks with Washington on a rebel withdrawal from eastern Aleppo, or from Aleppo this week. Do you have anything on that?
I've seen those comments. We don't have anything to confirm at this point. Obviously, we're very seized with the situation, the very dire situation in Aleppo. There was some discussion coming out of the meeting in Rome on Friday that there would be technical talks taking place this week, but we don't have anything to confirm at this point.
Could I
Could you follow up?
Of course. So follow up, you and then you. I promise. Don't give me a look.
On the technical talks, can you just characterize like what those specifically would be concerning, and what aspect would it be on the idea of withdrawal, as the Russians are saying?
Well, I think it's. I don't want to get into too much into the details. For one thing, they're still being hashed out, but the basic challenge is the same, which is how do we meet Russia, and by extension the regime's concerns about Nusra in Aleppo. So here's what I know about that. I've seen the reports. We've not been able to confirm. It's difficult to do, obviously, given the fighting and given our lack of access to what's happening on the ground. But to answer your question, of course we condemn any attack on a hospital or healthcare facility.
Would you actually have a few more? Sorry.
Okay, two more,
the U.S. is known to have influence with some of the rebel groups. What is your message to them? Should they continue the shelling?
The shelling of I think I just was very clear about. We would condemn any shelling by anybody, opposition rebels or regime forces, what have you, on healthcare, hospitals, schools, civilian infrastructure, any of that. And we've been, I would hope we've been very consistent publicly as well as privately,
Yeah.
conveying that message. Go ahead.
So this is happening in the context of these talks and responding to the talks that the U.S. and Russia are having, as I understand, on the withdrawal of rebels from Aleppo. The rebels said they would not leave. What makes the U.S. think that they would, since you're having the discussion?
You mean leave Aleppo?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, those, again, this is part of the dynamic that we're dealing with on the ground. Look, I mean,
can the U.S. really?
Sure. Let me. I'm just trying to. So, one of the dynamics of the siege that's been taking place on Aleppo is that as much as Russia, as much as the regime says that, oh, we need to, separate and get Nusra out and separate the opposition from Nusra, it's hard to conduct that kind of separation when you've got a civilian population, when you have these opposition forces under nearly constant barrage of bombs and assault. That's hard to do in a combat situation. It's hard to do if there was actually a ceasefire in place. Difficult enough to do, let me put it that way. When you add the fact that there's this siege taking place on Aleppo, that's a harder nut to crack, if I could put it that way. That said, we recognize that part of the getting to a solution here, and by a solution I mean an end to the violence, is finding a way to get Nusra out of the equation, to separate them, or to some way address our mutual concerns about Nusra as a terrorist organization, but also end the fighting. And that's the challenge. I don't know how to put it other way. So these are all technical talks taking place. I don't want to show too much of what we may be talking about. These are for these groups to hopefully address this week, but we don't know at this point whether those talks are going to take place.
Mark, my question. Sorry.
That's okay. Why don't you go, and then I'll get back to you.
I just wanted to ask you about a statement made by the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Bogdanov. He said that they received suggestions, American suggestions, on how to, I guess to bring about a cessation of hostility, or a total cessation of hostility, and then they in turn gave them to the Iranians. Are you aware of that? Could you shed some light on this? Could you tell us some of the points?
They in turn that we gave them? So I'm not going to, so I'm not, no, sorry, let me be very clear. I'm not going to talk about the substance of what we're looking at in terms of proposals, in terms of ways to, we're just not there yet. And you've seen that the Secretary has also been very disciplined about not talking about the substance of these talks before we've had a chance to really develop them and to reach agreement on them. Your question was about sharing them with the Iranians?
My question is, are you aware that, whatever proposals you gave to the Russians, they say that they have in turn given them to the Iranians, I guess, as party to the conflict in this case, and they are waiting on them. Are you aware of that?
I'm not aware of that particularly.
Did the Russians tell you we are going to share them with the Iranians beforehand?
I don't know. I mean, to some respect, the Iranians are part of the ISSG, so I just don't know. I don't know.
At the Secretary's news conference in Rome on Friday, he said all the talks between the U.S. and Russia and the set of ideas that have been exchanged were about getting to a political talks, not about removing Nusra forces, you surrender of the opposition in eastern Aleppo. He kind of painted it opposite. He said it was about getting to the intra-Syrian talks. How would a surrender of Nusra plus opposition
so we're not necessarily
in eastern Aleppo, so they would lose everything and then they would say, now we're ready to talk? I mean, explain to me the strategy.
Again, we're not, I don't want to get ahead of process here and what we're talking about. And if I've given that impression that we're talking about some kind of surrender, that's not the case. We're talking about an effort to de-escalate or pause the violence in Aleppo. Obviously, the Secretary is right in that our broader endgame here is to get the political talks back up and running because, as the Secretary made clear when he was in Rome, Russia and the regime are deluded if they think, even if they do take Aleppo, that this is over. It's not. The rebels, the opposition has shown that they're not willing to simply give up. And so the only solution, credible long-term solution to the fighting in Syria is a political one.
So the Russians and the Russian foreign minister said even last week that these should start immediately, now. And he actually criticized the United Nations for not setting them up immediately. So what is the impasse? I mean, his suggestion was it's the United Nations isn't setting it up and you guys aren't pressuring the opposition to start these talks immediately. Is that fair?
I don't think it is. I mean, I think the impasse is that, the opposition would tell you that, why should they go to Geneva and have talks when they're fighting for their very existence in places like Aleppo. Look, it all, again, the basic strategy, as difficult as it's been, has not changed. And fundamentally, it's cessation of hostilities. Then you move to, when you've got some kind of credibility established, you can move, and some kind of trust, you can move to and have that become the basis for negotiations to resume in Geneva. We just haven't been there in months. We had the Geneva in September 10th, but that fell apart quickly, and since then we've been nowhere close to that. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'll let your assessment go, which seems like we're backwards then many months from where we were, if we're not even where we were in September. But be that as it may, I just want to ask you specifically on the Russian claim today by the Defense Ministry that you guys gave, the French and the British, may have given the coordinates of their hospital or clinic to the opposition in order for it to be bombed.
We'd never do that, and it's completely false.
So you never give coordinates to the Syrian opposition?
We would never give coordinates to the Syrian opposition.
Do you have anything on the UN Security Council meeting now that is happening now and so on? Because the Russians seem to have dismissed it even before it began. They're saying that the proposal does not meet whatever their requirements, which may lead to another veto. Do you have any comment on that?
I don't. I know they're scheduled to meet later this afternoon, I believe. Right. Look, I mean, we've been very clear that we welcome any chance to highlight the dire situation in Aleppo and those who are suffering there.
And the Secretary's remarks yesterday. Yesterday, Secretary Kerry at the Saban Forum gave, in his remark, gave a stinging rebuke of the settlement policy. But he also refrained from committing to a veto at the United Nations, if a resolution on settlements will be forthcoming, only saying that if it is biased, unfair resolution calculated to delegitimize Israel, only then would they veto it. Is that a departure from, let's say, past American policy?
I think so, Saeed. I mean, we've said that before. I've said it before. I know John said it before. And it's consistent with always what's been our approach. We also often will make the point as well is we don't believe that multilateral settings are necessarily the best way to pursue what we believe is the ultimate goal here, which is a two-state solution. That's up to the parties. And we've said it before, whether it's when UN Security Council or elsewhere, that we oppose any resolutions that seek to delegitimize or are biased against Israel, and that remains the case.
I just have a couple of follow-ups on that. Yeah. But earlier in the day, Prime Minister Netanyahu, to the same forum, basically said, "Look, we will continue with settlement. It doesn't matter who is in power, whether it's Obama or Trump or anyone. We will continue with this policy." So, obviously, they are not heeding your call on cessation of settlements. In this, in this case, why not? What would be sort of contrary to U.S. principles and so on the issue of settlement by going to the United Nations? Why would that stand against your position, your principal position against settlements? If you're unable to persuade the Israelis, on your own, why not do it in an international forum?
Well, again, first of all, there's been no decisions made either way about any kind of step that may or may not be taken at the UN or elsewhere. I was there yesterday at the event. Secretary spoke, I think, very frankly about and out of friendship And he talked about some of the challenges. I mean, he got the same question that you just posed, which is, Israel doesn't seem to listen. And he acknowledged that on this case of settlements, they often don't listen. But that doesn't make our message any less relevant. And I think, the Secretary's abiding point yesterday was you can't have, and he was also, by the way, very quick to recognize this is not all on Israel. And frankly, settlements aren't the only impediment to a two-state solution. The Palestinians need to take steps.
He said settlements were not the cause of the conflict.
Exactly, not the cause of the conflict. But he said that as you look at the reality of settlements and the reality that they're creating on the ground, it's hard to imagine how you can get to a two-state solution. That was a very frank message to the Israeli government, to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it's been a message we've been trying to convey to them. But ultimately, as we've said many times before, the U.S. can only try to play a mediating role to get the two sides or the two parties back to the negotiating table. We can't force them, and they've got to both do it. And that's true for Israel. It's true for the Palestinians.
He also warned, against a vote that might take place today. Maybe it has taken place already, and the Knesset on legalizing, a sort of.
Talking about the legalization bill, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
The legalization
yeah.
bill. Did he follow his warning with any kind of a conversation with anyone in the Israeli government? Be it the Prime Minister of Israel. He said he spoke with him like 375 times. So did he speak with him on this issue?
I'm not sure that there was no, I don't believe there was a conversation after that event yesterday. But I'm sure his remarks were closely followed by those in the Israeli government yesterday. On the legalization bill, we understand that there is a plan to vote on it tonight. We also understand there may have been some changes to the bill, so we're I defer you to the Israelis for more information. I don't have what those changes might be.
Follow up on my question, because apparently the Israeli Knesset just passed, the first.
I keep telling we got to cut the Wi-Fi in here. I'll never get out of here.
I wonder if you have any comment on that, because yesterday it was the Secretary said was very clear and warning against such a step, but apparently today that step is taken. So in light of that, would the United States pursue any kind of effort at the United Nations?
I don't have any, certainly not going to speak to any actions we may pursue with regard to the United Nations. Our policy of settlements, I think it's crystal clear. Thanks, guys.
You're in the hands of an adolescent.